Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. There was also the elemental Wyrm Xiaohua, which snacked on magical crystals. It was just like a bottomless pit that required plenty of magical crystals to grow. However, with this powerful magical crystal, it would still continue growing and mature quickly even if Lin Li did not waste any more magical crystals on feeding it. Although the mages of the Tower of Dusk were rather talented, none of them had broken through to the legendary realm, and for those below it, accumulating mana through meditation was extremely important. Meditation within the scope of this magical crystal would be the same as receiving the benefits of the tidal waves. It was likely that a large batch of mages of the Tower of Dusk would probably become archmages at the peak of level 19. That meant that the Tower of Dusk would increase in strength, and there would also be more legendary powerhouses, who would provide incalculable benefits for the future development of the Tower of Dusk. Of course, to Lin Li, the most important thing was that he would be able to summon the Sky Castle once he had the magical crystal and sufficient power. Perhaps the Sanctuary Realm seemed illusory and unreachable to everyone, but for Lin Li, the Sanctuary Realm was a clear goal that he could see right in front of him. While others were searching for the direction to the Sanctuary Realm, Lin Li had to stay determined and move forward. Although he still couldn't control the Sky Castle, Lin Li did not quite feel depressed, because he knew clearly that he was very close to it. Lin Li put away the magical crystal ball and realized that there were no more valuable items in the hall, which also meant that the exploration of the Immortal King's treasure vault had come to an end. Lin Li walked out of the hall and walked towards the deadly corridor to see that Cheyenne and Elder Randy were looking in and trying to take a peek. After mastering the magical crystal, Lin Li got a clear understanding of the Sky Castle. He then walked towards an oil lamp and infused it with some of his mental strength, after which a teleportation portal appeared beneath his feet. Looking at the young mage who suddenly appeared beside them, Cheyenne and Elder Randy's expressions turned complicated. It was no doubt that the lucky Lin Li must have gotten some gains that probably exceeded the value of all of their gains combined. However, no one dared to take the initiative to speak, since there was no reason for them to question Lin Li. Hence, they had no choice but to be disappointed and continue guessing jealously. However, Lin Li had no time to bother about their mood, because he was eager to explore Osric's mausoleum. Hence, he smiled at Elder Randy and Cheyenne before saying, "Masters, I'm sorry to have made you guys wait for a long time, but this is already the last floor of the tower. If there isn't anything else, is it time to leave?" In any case, all of them had obtained plenty of loot, be it a crystal ball, magical equipment, the lost spells, or impeccable magical equipment designs. All of the items that they'd gained were enough for their respective forces to expand and become stronger. As Lin Li clearly did not plan to talk to them about the gains that he had gotten on the 6th floor, Cheyenne and Elder Randy had no choice but to nod helplessly. Everyone had reached an agreement, and quickly arrived at the hall of the 1st floor, but they had no choice but to stop when they saw the tightly shut door. When they arrived, everyone had to enter the 7-realm spiral of the orderly maze after passing through the first trap on the balcony of the 2nd floor. However, when they left, they could not avoid the door that had been locked with the magical 1000 contraption lock. Are we going to be trapped inside forever? I'd rather try to break through the 7-realm spiral again. Everyone was just thinking about how they should use their treasures after going home, so the tightly shut door was like a wet blanket to them. If they had no solution to leave this place, what was the point of all these great gains? However, everyone's worries did not last long. The 2 undead servants behind Lin Li suddenly walked out of the team and stood by the tightly shut door. Their movements could not be seen at all, and they simply extended their arms to pull the doors open. Although the magical 1000 contraption lock could not be unlocked at all, Lin Li had thought about leaving a long time ago. He was indeed not strong enough to control the Sky Castle, or even activate a mage with, but he could easily use his power to unlock the door. Although it was only the simple action of opening a door, the door was locked by the magical 1000 contraption lock. Hence, why could it be easily opened by the young mage Lin Li's team? Everyone watched in shock as the door moved back and forth a few times with Lin Li's body, and they began to develop a terrifying conjecture about what Lin Li obtained on the 6th floor. Lin Li looked at the crowd on his left and right, shrugged his shoulders, and walked out of the door while ignoring the look of surprise on their faces. Regardless of what everyone was thinking, they immediately stopped mulling over it after walking out of the gate of the central tower. Although they did not see anything unusual, they could vaguely feel something inexplicably bizarre in the surroundings. At this moment, the Sky Castle had already returned to its usual state of silence after Lin Li took away the magical crystal. Everything was no different from when they'd first arrived. However, it still felt peculiar yet clear. It seemed to be haunting everyone and causing them to tense up. Lin Li frowned slightly, and looked around to see that there was nothing at all in the spacious square. The buildings inside were exactly the same as outside the square. There were identical streets that were indistinguishable between the buildings. He turned back and ordered his subordinates to be careful and stay alert. He could no longer be bothered about shocking everyone else, and instead immediately whipped out his giant magical crystal from the ring of endless storm. As soon as Lin Li took out his magical crystal, Cheyenne and Elder Randy were all dumbfounded, for all they could see was that massive magical crystal, and they were thinking about the surging mana wave. What is it that actually produced such a huge magical crystal? Is this the ultimate treasure hidden behind that deadly corridor? They wondered. Cheyenne and Elder Randy were overwhelmed with jealousy. A legendary magical crystal was already considered very remarkable in the world of Anril, and they reckoned that even a magical beast of the sanctuary realm might not be able to produce it. Everyone knew that a magical crystal was no longer just a container for mana after its level had been fixed, and instead had its respective uses. Although they did not know what functions Lin Li's magical crystal had, they could not help but wish that they could exchange everything they had for it just because of that massive mana. Holding the magical crystal in his hand, Lin Li ignored the jealous eyes around him and injected a trace of mental strength into the magical crystal. Although he could not control the Sky Castle, he could clearly observe everything in the surrounding within a certain range, which allowed him to see and feel every change in the streets and buildings nearby. However, even though he could see everything, Lin Li felt increasingly uneasy because he could not detect any abnormalities at all. Not only were there no attackers hiding in dark corners, there was not a single change in energy at all. He wondered if he was just hallucinating, but he reckoned that it couldn't be the case after staring at everyone else's reaction. While staying alert, they carefully moved in the direction of the teleportation portal. At this moment, Uchfalusi, who had been following Lin Li, quickly strode towards Lin Li and uneasily said, "Master, there seems to be a strange tension in the air here." Lin Li stopped in his tracks all of a sudden and turned to look at Uchfalusi, before turning to look at Norfeller, who also nodded slightly. He suddenly realized something. He reckoned that Uchfalusi could be the reason he and the rest could not pinpoint what was wrong even though they could sense that something was amiss. However, although Uchfalusi was weaker than Norfeller, he was still a legendary lich, after all. Even holy light would not make him feel so oppressed. Hence, Lin Li reckoned that his feeling of oppression could have been due to undead creatures' natural fear towards their superiors. Although Lin Li was not a necromancer, he often had his two undead servants by his side, and had also had many long talks with Sendros, the most famous necromancer in Anril. Hence, Lin Li was not entirely clueless about the world of undead creatures. The world of undead creatures indeed had a strict hierarchy that was different from that of humans, and the division was instead determined by power that was similar to rules. The lower-level undead creatures tended to feel uncontrollably fearful when faced with superior undead creatures. They would not be able to control their fear unless they transcended the rules and created some. Back in the undead world of the Seven Realm Spiral, Uchfalusi, who had legendary power, had never felt oppressed even when he was faced with the three powerful undead lords, yet he actually mentioned it now. Clearly, he was extremely impacted by that feeling. An undead lord was already at the top of the undead hierarchy. What else was above them? At the thought of this, even Lin Li, who had always been calm, could not help but feel worried. He stopped in his tracks and injected more of his mental strength into the magical crystal to constantly expand his detection range. Lin Li's mental strength was focused on the magical crystal, and it spread to the surroundings like invisible ripples. The rows of buildings, streets, and everything else popped up in his head. Seeing that Lin Li had suddenly stopped in his tracks and slowly spun the magical crystal in his hand, Elder Randy and Cheyenne could not help but get nervous. Along the way, they had encountered various problems, but they had never shown such nervousness or anxiety before. Although they did not know what happened, they were able to guess from Lin Li's behavior that something extraordinary was about to happen. As the magical crystal expanded, the intangible mental strength continuously extended to the surroundings. All of a sudden, Lin Li opened his eyes, while his frown continuously deepened. Shock was written all over his face. The peculiar feeling that they felt turned out to be coming from the 36 towers, and it was clearly not like what he had previously thought. Seeing the horrified expression on Lin Li's face, Cheyenne and Elder Randy subconsciously tensed up. Although no one questioned Lin Li, they were all constantly guessing. Lin Li had already reached the peak of level 22, second only to Elder Randy, who was the only level 23 person amongst all of them. However, simply based on the 3 arrows that Lin Li had, even Elder Randy had to admit that he could not ignore the level of disparity between him and Lin Li. They could not imagine just what the young mage Lin Li had seen to make him so horrified. Resisting the weakness caused by the depletion of magic, Lin Li interrupted the activation of the supreme ManhwaRecap. He sighed helplessly in his heart. His strength was still too weak for the ManhwaRecap to be activated. A level 22 legendary mage was considered an impressive powerhouse in Amril, but he still had a long way to go before he could control the Sky Castle. The Sky Castle was undoubtedly the most powerful ultimate weapon of the High Elves. It was not controllable by legendary mages. In order to truly control the Sky Castle, one would probably have to wait until they entered the Sanctuary Realm, or even reach the peak of the Sanctuary Realm to fuse with the Sky Castle like the Immortal King had. Although Lin Li felt that it was a pity that he could not control the Sky Castle, he still looked forward to it because he knew that the Sanctuary Realm was not an illusory goal for himself. Besides, it was likely that there was the debris of the stars, nothingness, for Lin Li to acquire in Osric's mausoleum. When the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were brought together, Lin Li would have a smoother journey to the Sanctuary Realm. Although he still couldn't control the Sky Castle, Lin Li decided to take the magical crystal away because apart from being able to control the Sky Castle, it had other important uses for Lin Li. First of all, the massive mana contained in the magical crystal definitely had a huge effect on the improvement of Lin Li's strength. It allowed him to obtain the amount of mana that would require a week of meditation in just a moment, which was more effective than any other meditation potion and had no side effects. Although he had reached level 22, Lin Li was still not satisfied with his own strength after seeing the power of the Immortal King. When Lin Li first got the blueprint of the Sky Castle and the Scar of Death, the conquering ManhwaRecap that was composed of the streets and the 36 towers on the blueprint attracted Lin Li's attention. It was also precisely the conquering ManhwaRecap that allowed him to quickly speculate that the treasure map mentioned by the Manhwa family was the blueprint of the Sky Castle. However, at that time, although Lin Li confirmed that he was holding on to the blueprint of the Sky Castle and could recognize the complicated conquering ManhwaRecap that everyone was confused about, he only had limited knowledge about the Sky Castle. At that time, he was just an archmage who was on the edge of the legendary level. He was neither strong nor knowledgeable enough to judge the mystery of the towers from the blueprint. However, Lin Li was now really in the Sky Castle, and he knew far beyond reading the blueprint. Besides, when he was on the 6th floor of the central tower, he also received countless signals in his mind that were being forced into his head. Hence, he finally gained some new insights into the 36 towers that had become one with the conquering ManhwaRecap. Lin Li clearly felt that apart from being towers for mages and nodes for the conquering ManhwaRecap, each of the 36 towers had the characteristics of a psychic tower. Psychic towers, in essence, were towers for necromancers. The various ManhwaRecaps and alchemy arrays were leaning towards necromagic, and were meant for helping necromancers advance and improve their power. However, it was difficult to see actual psychic towers because necromancers were notorious in Amril. Once a necromancer began to build a psychic tower, it'd almost certainly result in attracting a large number of powerful attacks. Well, at least the Brilliant Shrine would never allow any necromancer to successfully build a psychic tower. However, if it were just the psychic towers alone, Lin Li would at most be just a little surprised. What really shocked Lin Li was the arrangement of the 36 towers. If the factor of the conquering mageweth was excluded, they would form a huge psychic array. Lin Li couldn't distinguish whether he initially already had some memory about the psychic array or it was just information that was given to him in waves by the magical crystal. He only knew that after seeing the arrangement of the 36 towers, the information about the psychic array would naturally pop up in his head. The mention of the psychic array would probably remind most people of the mageweth array, but Lin Li, who did not know much about necromagic, clearly knew at this time that psychic arrays were not part of alchemy and inscriptions. Instead, it was a classic necromagic array that was the ultimate dream for every necromancer. Unfortunately, most of the current necromancers in Anril were not as powerful as Sendros, and it definitely wouldn't be easy for them to survive even if they could be as strong as the Darkness Shrine and rival the Brilliant Shrine. As for the psychic tower, owning one would be a far-fetched idea, let alone a psychic array composed of various psychic towers. Everyone knew that level did not determine strength for necromancers. It also depended on the strength of the undead creatures that he had summoned. One of the biggest functions of the psychic array was to strengthen undead creatures. The psychic array could transform various elemental forces drawn from the space into the power of death that was required by the undead creatures, creating a space similar to the undead world. In this space, the almost infinite power of death made the speed of undead creatures' advancement increase exponentially. Besides, one of the most direct ways for undead creatures to increase their strength was to absorb the soul fire of other undead creatures. In addition to turning the elements in the region into the power of death, the psychic array could also collect the soul fire of the undead creatures and store it for absorption by other undead creatures. It was said that legendary undead creatures could be bred through psychic arrays. The effects were not inferior to the efficiency of the debris of the stars, gloomy dark. Of course, while the summoned undead creatures were powerful, that might not always be a good thing for the necromancers. It was just like when mages used magic, the more powerful and advanced the magic, the longer the casting time. As for the necromancer, the stronger the summoned undead creature was, the longer it'd take to summon it. The longer the summoning time, the easier it would be to interrupt for the enemy, and the more dangerous it would be for the necromancer himself. There might even be situations where the summoned undead creatures escaped control. Therefore, the duration of the summoning time was extremely important to necromancers. This was a psychic array that brought about another extremely important benefit for the necromancer. The undead creatures strengthened by the psychic array would continue to strengthen their connection with the necromancers. Not only would the summoning time be continuously shortened, it would also reduce the chances of the undead creatures rebelling. With the help of the psychic array, it would not be impossible for the necromancer to instantly summon undead creatures. Among the people Lin Li knew, the most powerful necromancer was the high priest Sendros. Even with Lin Li's current judgment, the power that Sendros once exhibited could still only be described as unfathomable. Lin Li didn't know if Sendros had a psychic tower or a psychic array. After all, he hadn't seen Sendros summon any undead creatures. Even till now. However, Lin Li was sure that if a necromancer had a psychic array, he would be able to experience a surge in power even if his psychic array was the most rudimentary and basic. Although he might not reach Sendros' level, he would definitely become a ruthless figure no one wanted to trifle with in Anril. The psychic array in the Sky Castle was not a basic one, and it was absolutely powerful enough to be extraordinary. The 36 towers were the maximum limit of the psychic array, and each tower was outrageously extravagant. Although the towers could not be compared to the Immortal King's central tower, the materials used for construction and the elaborate top-level mageweths and alchemy arrays were the brainchild of the High Elves. Any of them alone would definitely be a holy grail of a mage in Anril, since it was a tower for mages. The psychic arrays formed by the 36 towers were unimaginably powerful. The effect on undead creatures was probably not inferior to that of the magic tides on mages. The undead creatures here had been growing under the psychic array for 1,300 years, or perhaps even longer. The mere thought of how powerful they were was enough to drive others crazy. Couldn't the crazy high elves do something normal? Lin Li had thought that he would finally be able to conclude the expedition after exploring the central tower. However, Lin Li had never thought that there would be changes after he left, resulting in such a dangerous situation. Through the extension of mental strength, Lin Li could clearly see that the 36 towers had been completely shrouded in thick black mist within just moments. The massive death aura that was exuded through the violent transmission of mental strength from the black mist made Lin Li's face turn pale. Noticing the changes on Lin Li's face, Cheyenne and Elder Randy could not longer bear it. While staying alert, they each used their own means to detect changes around them. However, the sky castle had already returned to its normal, silent state. Although the sky was still radiating, the environment around it was extremely dim, thus hampering them from detecting everything properly. Cheyenne activated Warlock's eyes and scanned his surroundings to see that everything around him was dim. Hence, they had no choice but to put out all of their mental strength and detect something in their surroundings. Although they were both level 21 legendary mages, Cheyenne was inferior to Lin Li in terms of mental strength. Hence, exploring the sky castle was almost too much for him. However, Cheyenne did not leave empty-handed either. At least after the mental strength was dispersed, he realized that the corporeal vengeful spirits that had caused him a great deal of agony actually vanished into thin air. That alone was enough to show that there was indeed something wrong with the sky castle at this moment. Although Cheyenne was unclear what it was, he believed that it was a sign of a dramatic change. Princess Alun suddenly opened her eyes in fright, and exclaimed, "It's the towers scattered around the sky castle. I seem to be able to see some terrible things." Although Princess Alun did not have the magical crystal that controlled the sky castle like Lin Li, she managed to see the abnormal state of the towers through her legendary weapon, Song of Heart. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Elder Randy did not doubt Princess Alun's words, even though her strength had just reached the legendary level and she was the weakest amongst them. Her legendary technique was created for archers by Wind Whisperer Hull. That was also the reason that the archers could find enemies that were beyond their field of vision to shoot their enemies to death with their arrows. It also allowed Wind Whisperer Hull to kill the King of Leaden Kingdom with just one arrow, despite being extremely far away. Of course, Princess Alun couldn't be that clever, but the power of the Song of Heart was enough to allow her to see some things beyond the field of her vision. However, Princess Alun was obviously still limited by her strength, and could not see everything too clearly. Lin Li held on to the magical crystal that controlled the sky castle. Although he could not really control the sky castle, he could still see everything that was going on and changing in the sky castle. When Princess Alun was still telling Elder Randy about the changes of the towers, Lin Li had already seen that a dark shadow was condensing rapidly in the sky, seemingly gestating a daunting undead creature. The 36 towers were shrouded in thick black mist that looked just like a black python that was converging towards the rolling black shadow in the sky. If it were a bright environment, the grand scene would definitely attract everyone's attention. However, even Lin Li could only see the changes using the magical crystal. Lin Li knew deep down that the strong undead creature that was gestating in the sky might have existed in this sky castle since a long time ago. He reckoned that the undead creature might have somehow fallen into deep sleep and failed to detect their presence when they'd arrived. Lin Li looked at the magical crystal in his hand and reckoned that the undead creature must have awakened because he had broken through the orderly maze and taken away the magical crystal of the sky castle. However, Lin Li could not think of any explanation of the origin of this undead creature. If it had been left behind by the immortal king, it should have been awakened when they all had arrived. There was no reason for it to wait until Lin Li obtained the magical crystal to stop him and the rest from leaving. Since it was unlikely to be the immortal king, it could only be the others. However, the sky castle was just like another haven for the high elves, apart from the Tree of Eternity. The ordinary high elves were not qualified to be there, let alone create a powerful undead creature and change the 36 towers into psychic towers to form a strong psychic array. It was said that the Queen of High Elves had once set foot in this sky castle at the end of the Dark Age, and inherited a powerful weapon of the immortal king. At that time, the sky castles of the High Elves were destroyed one after another, and they stopped dominating the lands. The Queen of High Elves put her last hope on the last battle with Juresco, hoping to use the immortal king's weapon to save the High Elves who were on the verge of extinction. However, it was clear that she had failed. Not only had Juresco emerged victorious, he even ruined the Tree of Eternity, leaving the High Elves with no means to make a comeback. With the strength of the Queen of High Elves, she could completely do it, but her pride did not allow her to get herself associated with the undead creatures. Apart from the Queen of High Elves, Lin Li felt that the most suspicious culprit was the great Lord Osric. The note in the laboratory of the immortal king showed that Osric had clearly gone up to the sky castle and taken away almost all of the valuable things. More importantly, Osric entered the central tower using the same method as Lin Li and the rest, despite being a disciple of the immortal king. He, too, barged into the seven-realm spiral of the orderly maze. He could tell from Osric's note that the latter seemed to be looking for something important, but ended up venting his anger and destroying the immortal king's laboratory. That was not how a disciple ought to show respect to his teacher. Lin Li could not guess what Osric was looking for, but it was unlikely that it would be the magical crystal that controlled the sky castle. The sixth floor of the central tower was completely sealed by the immortal king using the space trap, so Osric probably wouldn't have been able to enter, either. However, Osric should have known that the magical crystal was right there. If his goal was the magical crystal, the words he wrote on that note should be his complaints, and not a clue about where the immortal king had hidden the item. The experience he had on the sixth floor of the central tower made Lin Li vaguely feel like the immortal king seemed to have some connection with himself. Putting aside the striking resemblance between Lin Li and the immortal king since it could be a coincidence, Lin Li could not help but wonder why he was the only one who got sent into the fantastical scene, and why the endless labyrinth appeared in it. What did the immortal king mean when he said those words to me after I watched the evolution of Anril? Lin Li had obtained the magical crystal that controlled the sky castle and received plenty of information from it. He wondered, can I just be narcissistic and fancy that I'm the successor of the immortal king? Lin Li was filled with doubts and questions, but after he linked them all together, he felt that the absurd answer was not impossible. Perhaps Osric did know something, and thus was displeased with the immortal king. After failing to find that important thing, he left the note behind in the sky castle to make life hard and create trouble for the successor of the immortal king. It would only be reasonable for him to do so. Although Lin Li could not be sure, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that Osric was very suspicious. Damn it. The world that Lin Li was in before he arrived in Anril was filled with evil characters throughout 1,000 years. Why did the perverts of this world plot against others more than 1,000 years in advance? Juresco, the immortal king, and the bastard Osric are all the same. You're dead anyway, what's the point of plotting against others? Would it make you happier? Looking at the condensed black mist in the sky, Lin Li couldn't help but cuss continuously. Be it the undead creature that was left behind by Osric or any other psychotic creatures, one thing for sure was that the setup was meant for plotting against the person who obtained the magical crystal in the end, or rather the immortal king's successor. However, cursing could not help him solve the problem at hand. Lin Li could completely sense the massive and daunting power in the condensed black mist. The undead creature had been gestating in the highest grade psychic array. Even an ordinary skeletal warrior would have definitely possessed power that surpassed that of the skeletal lord. If Osric really had been the one behind this, he probably wouldn't have just left a skeletal warrior behind. Only moments passed, yet the black mist in the sky had become increasingly obvious, and would soon cover the sun like boiling black ink. Even the endless nether storm seemed to have been subdued by the huge force at this moment, and the brilliant light that was conjured up could no longer be seen in the sky. At this point, there was no longer a need to explain anything. As long as they were not blind, everyone would definitely be able to see the changes in the sky. The terrifying power emanating from the dark mist seemed to be heralding the end of the world. Everyone could not hide the horror that was written all over their faces. Even Elder Randy, who had level 23 power, could not help but feel powerless when faced with that power. Finally, Lin Li vaguely saw a tall figure in the thick mist, but due to the fact that he did not have enough control over the magical crystal yet, he could not see the figure clearly regardless of how much mental strength he infused the crystal with. However, the terrifying and unrivaled power that filled the entire sky castle could be felt clearly without any special techniques. That is Osric. All of a sudden, Lin Li's mind was filled with Kenora's cry of horror. Lin Li suddenly froze, and his heart almost stopped beating at this moment. He asked in disbelief, "Are you sure? How can that be? Shouldn't Osric be in his mausoleum? How could he possibly be here, transformed into an undead creature?" After finding out that his days were numbered, Lord Osric channeled all of his energy into the construction of his tomb. That was what Kenora's told Lin Li, as well as one of the most common speculations about Osric in Amril. Besides, the Alana Guild of Magic and the Adventurers Guild also verified that after discovering Osric's mausoleum. However, now that he was facing the undead creature gestating in the sky, Kenora's actually yelled Osric's name. Lin Li obviously couldn't take it. Osric had built his mausoleum precisely for the sake of giving himself a place to rest in peace. If he were to turn into an undead creature, what was the point of putting in so much effort into creating his own mausoleum? Back then, Lord Osric was full of vigor, and was ambitious enough to build a sky castle. Even though he inevitably feared death in his later years, he would never stoop so low as to turn himself into an undead creature. After letting out a cry, Kenora's heard Lin Li's question, and was somewhat uncertain. "I know, this is a little weird, but that figure really reminds me of Osric." Kenora's indefinite answer did not dispel Lin Li's doubts. Instead, he was more worried. Kenora's had been sealed in the hammer by Osric and placed in the eternal furnace. It was almost impossible for him to see any other high elven powerhouse apart from Osric. Besides, Kenora's and Osric had interacted with each other for countless years, and thus he knew Osric better than most people. Hence, the possibility of recognizing the wrong person was rather small. Of course, Lin Li still hoped that Kenora's had really recognized the wrong person. Osric was formidable before his death, and was the disciple of the immortal king, second only to the queen of the high elves. If the undead creature was really Osric's incarnation after death, there wouldn't be a chance of surviving. Lin Li looked at the tall figure that was condensing in the sky, feeling a little hopeful. He said to Kenora's in his head, "The high elves absolutely detest necromagic and are disgusted with it." Although plenty of high elves began to study necromagic at the end of the Dark Age, Osric has an extraordinary identity, so he probably wouldn't touch necromagic. "Humph, didn't you know? Many of the so-called rules are made by the superior rulers for their underlings. Hence, they do not really have to obey the rules." As the immortal king's disciple, Osric had long inherited all of the immortal king's necromagic. It was only up to him to decide whether to use it. "There's probably no one in Amril who can surpass him in necromagic," said Kenora's, who was clearly disdainful towards the prestigious high elves. Yet had no choice but to admit that Osric was powerful. "Damn it, the high elves are playing such tricks too," Lin Li thought to himself in disdain. He suddenly remembered the phrase, "One may steal a horse, while another may not look over a hedge," that was a popular saying about double standards in the world that he came from. Norfeller's previous owner was Osric's half-brother, who had to hide in the secret palace to practice and study necromagic. On the other hand, no one dared to say anything about the immortal king inheriting necromagic, even though all of the high elves, including the queen and other elites, were all well aware of it. But even if Osric mastered necromagic, he might not have necessarily turned himself into an undead creature. He was a mighty high lord and a remarkable, majestic, and stunning figure during the Dark Age, yet he actually became an undead creature that was deemed dirty by the high elves. Even Lin Li found the extreme transformation to be unacceptable, let alone Osric, who was almighty and glorious. "I don't know about that," said Kenora's. He was, after all, just a prisoner sealed in the hammer at that time. Most of the information he knew about Osric was told to him by Osric himself. How could Osric possibly tell him that he would be becoming a dirty undead creature after his death? However, I do remember that when Osric returned to the eternal furnace, his emotions and temperament changed drastically, and he seemed to be less fearful of death. He even occasionally revealed some information in his words, something along the lines of him being able to be reborn again after his death, said Kanoris while recalling the past. Upon hearing Kanoris' words, Lin Li's heart sank, and he thought, he can still be reborn after death? Is this alluding to being transformed into an undead creature? No one could really escape death, and the breaking through of realms was just to allow one's life to continue and extend. Even the powerhouses of the sanctuary realm had definite lifespan. At the moment of death, they would turn into another form of life and continue living. Could that be what Osric meant by rebirth? Is this what he meant by rebirth? Lin Li looked up at the sky to see that the tall figure in the thick black mist was gradually turning solid. He then said to Kanoris in his head, other than these, what else do you remember? No matter what, escaping death should be something worth celebrating, shouldn't it? However, I felt that he seemed to be a little worried sometimes. It seemed he was fretting over something. I don't know what it was, though. He refused to tell me, and I couldn't ask either, Kanoris said helplessly. Although Kanoris did not explicitly point out anything, the various hints would verify a terrifying conjecture when put together. However, at this moment, Lin Li no longer had the time to think about whether or not the undead creature was Osric and why it had appeared in the sky castle. As the shadows gradually condensed, a massive amount of death aura filled the entire sky castle, turning the sacred place that once represented the glorious high elves into a completely silent region. The death aura was even more suffocating and daunting than the one in the undead world in the seven-realm spiral. It made all of them feel infinite despair. It was definitely a terrifying existence that surpassed the undead lords. Those who had experienced the seven-realm spiral clearly remembered the terrifying and austere atmosphere that was present when the three undead lords appeared. However, the three of them now seemed simply too inferior compared to this creature. Staring at the figure that was gradually condensing, none of them communicated with each other, but they raised their weapons at the same time. The gems of the staffs radiated bright rays of lights, and the massive mana condensed before blasting towards the dark mist in the sky. With the sounds of a bowstring being pulled and released, the sharp arrows that glowed with magic light seemed to dart into the black mist like meteors. Even the prideful unicorn began to shoot out some sacred light from its spiral horn. Instantly, the sounds of explosion filled the air and the black mist in the sky was blown away before condensing again. Later on, it was again burst open and rolled amidst the clouds like tidal waves. Everyone almost put in all of their power and displayed their strongest techniques in hopes of destroying or killing the undead creature before it was fully awakened. However, when the roar subsided, the magic light faded, and the scene in the sky once again caught everyone's eyes. They were all dumbfounded. The rolling black mist was still as thick as ever, and the figure gestating in it was extremely solid. It was as if the attacks never happened. What exactly is that? Staring at the figure in the sky, even Elder Randy could not control himself or stop his body from quaking. He reckoned that even the Green Dragon King that had brought everyone despair might not be able to withstand the crazy attacks just now. However, the figure was not only unharmed, it didn't seem to slow down at all. No matter what, even without the protection of the dark mist, that guy is very likely to reach level 24. Once he awakens, I'm afraid. Cheyenne gripped the staff tightly in his hand, and horror was written all over his face. Even if Cheyenne didn't mention it, everyone knew and understood what an undead creature that was most likely level 24 meant for himself and others. Although Elder Randy was a level 23 druid who was just one level away from level 24, his abilities were definitely way worse. Level 24 was the strongest level below the sanctuary realm. Besides, this place was obviously the territory of that formidable undead creature. Damn it, if that's really that bastard Osric, these people definitely wouldn't have the ability to retaliate. The only outcome would be death. Lin Li cursed bitterly in his heart, but he never looked at the sky again. Instead, he exhibited his flying skills and flew towards the teleportation portal. Regardless of whether it's Osric or something else, I'd better run since I can't beat it. Lin Li thought. He did not think that he had the ability to challenge a level 24 undead creature. Besides, if the creature was really Osric, the power that he exhibited would definitely be beyond level 24 since he had inherited the immortal king's necromagic. Seeing Lin Li fly towards the teleportation portal with his subordinates, Elder Randy and the rest suddenly snapped out of their trance. No matter how powerful the entity in the sky was, their journey would come to an end once they left through the teleportation portal. If the entity were to chase after them, the level 24 Green Dragon King could deal with it, and at least help them by some time. All of a sudden, a race seemed to have broken out in the Sky Castle, and the legendary powerhouses each exhibited their powers and went all out to dash towards the teleportation portal. Elder Randy immediately turned into a Thunder Eagle and chased Lin Li and others like a bolt of lightning. The two mages Cheyenne and Culefen had naturally reached their flying limit, following closely behind Elder Randy. On the ground, the legendary archer Gilder made his steps as light as possible. But he was not any slower than the flying mages. Although Princess Elune was the weakest, she did not lag behind, and was in fact even faster than them because she was riding the unicorn. They looked out to see that a legendary array had already appeared in their field of vision, after which they immediately sped up in a bid to leave this terrifying region before the undead creature awakened. However, at this moment, Lin Li suddenly felt a huge mana wave not too far ahead. Before he could even react, a massive black gate appeared out of nowhere, blocking them from reaching the teleportation portal. Lin Li had no choice but to stop and stare at the black door. He then swallowed his saliva forcefully with a look of dismay, and exclaimed, "Damn it, Tide of Death." The Tide of Death was actually not considered a rare necromagic spell. The necromancers who had stepped into the legendary realm would mostly master it. Liches like Ujfalusi had long mastered the Tide of Death as early as during the ruins of Sire Town adventure. After following Lin Li, he used it more than once. However, Lin Li still remembered clearly that Sendros had once mentioned that the Tide of Death could be considered one of the most powerful necromagic spells even though it was mastered by almost every legendary necromancer. Through the Tide of Death, a necromancer would be able to continuously summon all sorts of undead creatures until his mana was completely exhausted. The strength of the Tide of Death lay in the undead creatures that it could summon, and it would continuously change together with the capability of the necromancer as well. The more powerful the necromancer, the more powerful the undead creatures summoned by the Tide of Death. If it were a necromancer who was on Ujfalusi's level, Lin Li wouldn't take the Tide of Death seriously at all. However, at the thought of the undead creature in the sky possibly being Osric, Lin Li could not help but wonder what kind of undead creatures a level 24 powerhouse would summon. There was no need to guess or wait. In an instant, countless undead creatures emerged out of the dark gate like a flood. In the tides of undead creatures, there was not a single low-level undead creature. Even the skeletal warriors were at least level 16 and level 17. The rest, the hell ghouls, vampires, and liches, were at least level 18, and many of them were near the legendary level. Immediately after the undead creature surged out, 3 humorous WYRMS immediately roared silently. Many legendary necromancers would mostly only summon humorous WYRMS after they inherited the soul fire of dragon crystals, but the humorous WYRMS were mostly a kind of hybrid. However, everyone could now sense that the 3 humorous WYRMS had truly inherited the dragon crystals and WYRM bones. However, that was not the end. There was a legendary vampire that was in the form of a bat behind the humorous WYRM and a legendary skeletal warrior that was emanating a gilded glow. There were also more than 20 legendary undead creatures and a legendary lich that was holding a skeleton staff high up in the air, all of whom were blocking Lin Li. Lin Li and others did not hesitate at all, while the undead army had already rushed forwards like a surging tide. At this time everyone knew that they only had one choice, and that was to go all out and fight. Regardless of how many undead creatures there were in front of them, charging forwards was the only way they could have a silver lining. Yes, they had to go all out and not allow the undead army to stop them. They had to find a way out before the strong and powerful undead creature awakened. Other actions would only cause them to fall into the abyss of death. Lin Li summoned the Crimson Dragon and the demon Gordon immediately. Before the two summoned creatures fought with the undead creatures, Lin Li's Helios scepter had already shot out a dazzling ray of light. Huge ice cubes fell onto the undead creatures from the air, and every one that landed would explode with extreme chilliness that caused the surrounding undead creatures to freeze. They then shattered immediately with the sounds of glass breaking. The level 20 magical snowstorm was still exerting its power, but Lin Li had already raised the Helios scepter again. With the end of the spell, a large ice ball was shot at the crowd. It spun at high speed and continuously sprayed hail at the undead creatures, seemingly trying to slit them. Lin Li did not consider preserving his mana at all. He continued to release legendary magic one by one. The snowstorm had just begun to show some signs of losing power, yet burning boulders already seemed to fall onto the undead creatures like a meteor shower. As soon as the frequency of the falling boulders decreased, the thunderbolt pillars crashed down again, while the legendary magic ice balls continuously condensed like low-level ice bullets. They continuously darted at the undead creatures and harvested them like wheat. After summoning the Crimson Dragon, Ujfalusi did not exert his own tide of death, but continued to perform serial corpse explosions. In the face of the enemy's powerful undead army, his own tide of death would only be useful when summoning the last few undead creatures. Norfeller held his dagger and dashed towards two legendary vampires like a bolt of lightning. He was tackling two enemies, but he managed to hit one of them. Although he was also a legendary vampire, Norfeller grew after consuming the blood of Wyrms. Not only was he faster, he was far stronger. The silver dragon that Elder Randy had transformed into already collided with the three humorous Wyrms forcefully, without any fancy technique and only with brute force. Faced with the attack of the humorous Wyrms, he did not dodge, but instead seized the time to attack them. The legendary archer Gilder constantly stroked the bowstring with his fingers, and he managed to create a continuous series of attacks with his 7-star archery skill. The arrows shot into the undead creatures and shattered them into pieces. Kilophen, who specialized in fire magic, stood beside Gilder, but he did not allow the injury of his right arm to affect his performance. His staff continuously glistened and fire rain surged towards the undead creatures wave after wave. A melodious song suddenly sounded, and a sharp arrow shot through the air before appearing behind the undead army and extinguishing the soul fire of a legendary lich. Princess Elune was not strong, and although the Song of Heart was infinitely powerful, the role it could play was very limited when faced with the undead army. However, the weaker undead creatures became her targets. The winged angel summoned by Cheyenne went against the legendary vampires who were also known for their speed. The sounds of collisions could be heard in the air. However, they could not see the winged angel and vampires at all. Cheyenne waved his dark moon staff in the air, and huge tornado raged across the undead army, causing the undead creatures to be drawn into it without resistance, and thus containing them. They were then shredded into pieces. Staring at the huge waves and the golden skeletons that were surging towards him, Lin Li immediately activated his light and darkness domain. Under the shower of holy light, the golden skeletons burst with black fumes, and a few angels of light and dark surged forward. Instead of fighting, they detonated and caused two legendary golden skeletons to be destroyed and turn into ashes immediately. The purification effect of holy light on undead creatures was still too slow for Lin Li. Hence, after getting rid of the two golden skeletons, he immediately put away his light and darkness domain. The snowstorm once again began to condense over the heads of the undead creatures. As the huge pieces of ice fell, the frozen ice balls immediately flew towards the undead creatures. The numerous undead creatures swarmed towards them again, and were soon destroyed. Even though the undead creatures were strong, the all-out attacks by Lin Li and the rest left them with no choice but to be defeated. However, Lin Li and the rest did not manage to advance much just because of this, because the black door had yet to close, and undead creatures were surging out of it continuously. In terms of results, Lin Li and the other legendary powerhouses had definitely achieved results that they had never even imagined through their maniacal and unrestrained attacks. However, despite the tremendous results they had achieved, none of them looked in the least bit relieved. All of their attacks were accurate and none of them missed at all. They managed to form various empty spots amongst the undead creatures, but their attacks did not leave any lasting traces behind, as if they were stones being thrown into the lake that created ripples, which were instantly smoothed out by the lake water. The numbers of undead creatures that they had killed continued to increase. However, their speed was far slower than the rate at which the undead creatures were emerging from the darkness. The ground and the sky were both covered with undead creatures. Not only did Lin Li and the rest not rush over, they even gradually began to retreat under the impact of the swarming undead army. Everyone knew that if they wanted to kill the undead army, it would seem impossible to do so at this juncture. However, they also knew that they had no other choice, and the consequence of staying behind would be facing the strong undead creature nearing the sanctuary realm. They would rather face an undead army that was continuously charging forward and fight for a near impossible chance to survive than face the terrifying undead creature that was about to awaken in the sky. However, things did not always go according to one's will. The undead army grew stronger despite the massacre, but the fierce and accurate attacks of the people gradually weakened after a while. That was not because the attacks required too much power, but mostly because the situation in front of them made them hesitate. Although everyone knew that killing was the only way out of this place, their chances of doing so would decrease continuously as the number of undead creatures of the undead army increased. They had no choice but to reconsider. If the undead creature in the sky were to really awaken before they could escape, they would end up dead once their power was depleted. However, they also knew clearly that they would have a hard time escaping from the powerful undead creature nearing the sanctuary realm even if they remained in the state where they were at the peak of their power. However, no one knew how the situation would change until the very end. Perhaps there might be an opportunity, perhaps. The silver dragon that Elder Randy had transformed into soon got rid of the 3 humorous WYRMS, but his reckless fighting caused him to sustain multiple wounds. Before he could even catch his breath, a few new humorous WYRMS began surrounding them again. Hielofen turned as pale as a sheet. The arrows shot by Gilder gradually became sparse, and while Princess Alun's Song of Heart was still sounding in the air from time to time, it was no longer as dominant as when it shot the undead creatures to death. The unicorn stomped its legs onto the ground in frustration while continuously emitting lightning from the sharp horn on its head. However, it was much weaker than before. Cheyenne had already summoned the winged angel back to his side. The dark moon staff was still flashing every now and then, but the magic he cast was not as dense as before. Although every spell he cast could still destroy many undead creatures, he was obviously still feeling conflicted and hesitant. Among all people, Lin Li was the only one who was still continuously launching strong attacks. Be it the powerful magical equipment or the huge mental strength foundation, the mana depletion was insignificant for Lin Li. Legendary magic was just like basic beginner magic to Lin Li. He continuously exerted magic to get rid of the undead creatures. However, Lin Li was still just at the peak of level 22 at the end of the day, regardless of how massive his mental strength and how infinite his mana was. Although one's abilities were not entirely determined by their level most of the time, their level still represented their understanding and mastery of nomological power. Lin Li could now maintain a steady output of mana, but could not increase the amount of mana released, because he was limited by his level. Hence, he couldn't cause great damage to the undead army. Lin Li had already sensed the changes in everyone else, but he could not blame anyone, because he knew clearly that the chances of killing the undead army and breaking through were slim even if they were still going all out like before. The undead army was still growing continuously, and the undead creatures surged out of the black door with no signs of stopping. In the sky, the extremely powerful shadow became more and more solid, and seemed to be awakening soon. It was a powerful existence that was nearing the sanctuary realm. Once it awakened, they would probably be unable to even push through one round. this can't go on anymore. I have to find another way to solve the problem now. Otherwise, it will be no different from waiting for death, Lin Li thought to himself with a frown. He began to brainstorm for another solution to escape while being faced with the endless undead army. All of a sudden, the 36 towers popped up in Lin Li's mind. Everything that they were going through and had encountered was clearly caused by the psychic array. Since they couldn't get rid of the undead army or contend with the undead creature that was awakening in the sky, could they try to solve the problem and get out of the situation by tackling the source? At this moment, under the influence of the psychic array, the entire sky castle had already become an undead realm. The substantial death aura was 100 times stronger than that in the true undead world. In the space covered by the psychic array, all of the undead creatures were shrouded in magic tides that allowed their strength to double. Even the power of Lin Li, Uchfalusi, Norfeller, and the two humorous WYRMS was greatly enhanced. There was also necromagic. Even the deathfire bombs thrown out by the hell ghouls or the bone spears tossed by the liches, which were low-level magic, were clearly strengthened as well. As for the high-level necromagic that was used by the legendary undead creatures, their power was all enhanced greatly by the psychic array. Even the tide of death was no longer being supported by the powerful undead creature in the sky at the moment, but the psychic array was also supporting and continuously summoning the undead army. With the huge power of the psychic array, it probably would not take too long for the entire sky castle to be filled with undead creatures. Moreover, Lin Li also found that almost all of the undead creatures that had been destroyed did not have their soul fire annihilated immediately. Instead, it disappeared when the undead creatures were destroyed. Obviously, it was one of the tricks played by the psychic array. To the undead creatures, there was nothing more nourishing than soul fire. Not only was the unrestrained killing of the undead creatures of no help to them, it even helped supplement the undead creature in the sky. However, despite knowing this, Lin Li still could not let everyone stop. At the rate that the undead army was growing, there'd soon be no place for them in the sky castle. By then, there would be no need to wait for the undead creature in the sky to awaken. The undead army itself was enough to drown them out. Lin Li knew very well that the psychic array was extremely powerful, but a doubt of his regarding the source of power of the psychic array also popped up at the same time. Under normal circumstances, the psychic array would turn all magical elements in the surroundings into the power of death that could be used to gestate undead creatures. However, the sky castle now could be said to have no connection with Amril, since it had already entered the chaotic flow of time and space through the cracks in space. Coupled with the nether storm that was shrouding the sky castle, the sparse magical elements were not enough to support the role of the psychic array, let alone gestate a powerful undead creature that was nearing the sanctuary realm. Therefore, the current psychic array definitely did not use mana that came from the free magical elements in space. It was very likely to have come from the kinetic system, which was the same as the other mage arrays and alchemy arrays in the sky castle. Only the kinetic system with infinite mana could make the psychic array exert such powerful effects. At the thought of this, Lin Li seemed to have finally gotten some clue. If he could disable the psychic array, the undead creature in the sky might slow down or even pause in its awakening process. The tide of death that summoned the undead army would likely end as well. Li suddenly stopped casting spells and summoned the Crimson Dragon to his side. The Crimson Dragon had its abilities greatly enhanced by the psychic array, just like the enemy's undead creatures. It was even approaching level 21. After being summoned by Lin Li, it surrounded the undead creatures and did not allow any one of them to escape. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Lin Li controlled the Crimson Dragon and glanced at the undead army that was as vast as ocean below. Without hesitation, he turned around and flew towards a tower that was rather far away. Seeing that Lin Li had suddenly left, Cheyenne and Elder Randy felt their hearts sink. None of them knew what the young mage Lin Li had gone to do at this moment. In their opinion, it was most likely that he had already abandoned them and escaped. Cheyenne and Elder Randy still remembered clearly that there was still a corridor that was full of danger on the last floor of the central tower. Lin Li was also the only one who could pass through the corridor and enter the hall behind it. If he had really gone back to that place, probably even the terrifying undead creature in the sky couldn't pass through the corridor that was full of traps. The space traps in the corridor were created by the immortal king with power that was almost as strong as the deities. Even if the power of the undead creatures in the sky castle had reached the sanctuary level, they still could not break through the blockade of the space traps. It could be said that the 6th floor was the only safe place in the entire sky castle after the undead creature awakened. Of course, they also knew that if they were trapped in that hall, they might not be able to come out for a while. Unless they had reached the sanctuary realm and had the strength to fight against the undead creatures, they would probably die in there. However, they thought about how young Lin Li was and the achievements that he had made. They reckoned that he might really come back after reaching the sanctuary realm, especially since he had the massive magical crystal of the Tree of Eternity. Staring at the back of Lin Li, who had left, Elder Randy and Cheyenne were filled with complicated emotions all of a sudden. There were jealousy and envy within them, as well as a hint of resentment, even though they all knew that no one was obliged to die together with them and it was actually quite normal for everyone to split up when things got tough. In fact, Lin Li had long thought about retreating to the central tower because the space traps in the corridor could definitely keep them safe. However, he did not want to hide there unless it was the last resort. Besides, he was no longer alone now. He still had to take care of the Tower of Dusk that was established after he put in painstaking efforts. He did not want it to be gone by the time he was powerful enough to leave. More importantly, Lin Li also remembered and was concerned about Osric's mausoleum where there was very likely to be the debris of the stars, nothingness, which would play a very important role in his promotion to the sanctuary realm. If he had the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, staying in the sanctuary realm for a while did seem to be a good choice. However, he only had 4 pieces of the debris of the stars now, and making it to the sanctuary realm was undoubtedly even more difficult. While maneuvering and riding the Crimson Dragon, Lin Li rose into the air and looked down at the towers below. The 36 towers that formed the psychic array were also the magic nodes of the huge conquering ManhwaRecap. Under Lin Li's control, the Crimson Dragon slowly rotated and moved from the tower to the surrounding streets, and then to the buildings around it. Lin Li could see everything. According to speculation, if the power of the psychic array was not obtained by converting the magical elements in the space, there then had to be an input channel for other energy. Lin Li would only be able to come up with a method that could affect the operation of the psychic array accurately by knowing the origin of its power. The psychic array was composed of 36 towers. What was the core of the towers, and how did they connect together closely to form the psychic array? As for the driving force, how did the other forces function in the psychic array and turn into death energy? The towers were part of the psychic array and also the magic nodes of the conquering ManhwaRecap. Although the cobweb-like streets were not very complicated, it still wasn't easy to distinguish between the two. Moreover, given the current situation, there was no time to think or calculate and measure, they could only rely on their eyes and knowledge. Lin Li frowned and kept his eyes glued to the patterns painted on the surface of the streets while his mind processed various information at a high speed. After finding the relevant information about psychic arrays, he decided to tackle the origin of mana. However, when Lin Li saw the part about the input of mana, he could not help but be stunned. After he chased all the way to the end, he actually discovered that although the towers were part of the psychic array, the power was transmitted to the array using the streets that constituted the conquering ManhwaRecap. This is incredible. Lin Li was stunned by this discovery. It was not as simple as stacking 2 designs together. Instead, it was equivalent to embellishing the conquering ManhwaRecap in the psychic array. Be it the ManhwaRecaps or the ManhwaRecap arrays, both were extremely rigorous disciplines where mistakes were not allowed. A minor change in the patterns or nodes during the inscription might result in the failure of the entire ManhwaRecap array. The conquering ManhwaRecap and psychic array in front of Lin Li seemed to be a pair of conjoined twins with different brains, but the same heart. Of course, it was not a flaw of the psychic array. On the contrary, no matter who created this psychic array, it definitely took some skills to make it so simple and efficient. Even Lin Li might not be able to do it himself. Lin Li decided that he would definitely carefully study the special connections between the psychic array and the conquering mageweth if he had the time to do so. He believed that even though he had reached the level of a guru of inscription, he could still get a lot of inspiration from it. Unfortunately, time was what Lin Li lacked the most now. The undead army seemed to have filled almost half of the sky castle. The terrifying aura on top of his head was also becoming more and more intense, as if the undead creature was about to awaken anytime soon. Just as Lin Li was thinking about dealing with the psychic array, he suddenly got goosebumps and was overwhelmed with horror. Lin Li, who had a telepathic connection, looked up in the sky to see that there was a pair of reddened eyes watching him fiercely through the thick black mist. Kanoris, could that guy in the sky really be Osric? If he's really Osric, his power is probably beyond that of the sanctuary realm, isn't it? Lin Li could already clearly feel the mana wave that was coming from the undead creature in the sky. Now, the undead creature was soon to be awakened, but it was still far from reaching the sanctuary realm. The High Lord Osric was truly a powerhouse above the sanctuary realm back then. Since he had already inherited all of the immortal king's necromagic, there seemed to be no reason for him to fall back into the sanctuary realm when turning into an undead creature. Even if he would inevitably lose some power, the understanding of laws would not disappear because of the weakening of mana. Unless Osric met with a mishap during the transformation and lost some of his knowledge, but the possibility would be really low. If it were another necromancer, it might still happen with a mistake, but Osric was an absolute genius in the Dark Age and the disciple of the immortal king. Well, I'm not too sure, either. I'm sure what that undead creature looks like, and it does resemble Osric greatly, be it in terms of appearance or mana wave. Kanoris found it hard to explain too, but having spent so many years with Osric, he felt that there was no way he would mistake the figure for Osric if it wasn't him. No, there is definitely a problem. Even if Osric turns himself into an undead creature, he should have been turned into a lich. There's no need for him to gestate in this psychic array for so many years. Even Osric's younger brother has successfully converted himself into a lich. With Osric's ingenuity, he definitely wouldn't make such low-level mistakes. Lin Li was filled with bewilderment, but now was not the time to focus on figuring out the identity of the undead creature. Instead, he should be trying to find a way to solve the problem in front of him. He shook his head and maneuvered the Crimson Dragon to fly towards a tower. However, at this moment, he saw a force being separated from the undead army. A few humorous WYRMS and vampires flew straight towards Lin Li, clearly trying to stop him from approaching the tower. Lin Li was slightly shocked. Ever since the Tide of Death appeared, the undead army was continuously summoned, and they blocked them from reaching the teleportation portal. However, they did not seem to have a clear mission, and were just instinctively attacking the enemies nearby. However, the emergence of this force now showed that there seemed to be a commander behind them, which was none other than the undead creature in the sky. That guy is almost awakening. Lin Li was also anxious. If the undead creature above him really awakened, he probably wouldn't have the chance to escape to the central tower at all. Thinking of this, Lin Li immediately summoned Norfeller and Ujfalusi to help him block the undead creatures. Lin Li himself then landed the Crimson Dragon and flew towards the tower using his own flying techniques. I've got it. Kanoris exclaimed, sounding slightly excited. Tell me then. I don't have time to play the riddles with you, Lin Li said while waving the helioscepter and firing dozens of thousand miles of ice to freeze a humorous WYRM that was getting in his way. That's a ghost. It definitely is. It can't be wrong, said Kanoris, who also knew that it was not time to bicker with Lin Li now. He quickly told Lin Li of his conjecture firmly. Lin Li finally landed on a tower in front, and the helioscepter continued to shine while the magic was exhibited one after other, instantly wiping out the undead creature scattered all over the place. At the same time, he also asked Kanoris, what kind of undead creature are ghosts? Are they even undead creatures too? I'm not sure if they are part of the undead creatures, but I know that this ghost is very likely to have been created by Knorris using the eternal furnace back then. Although Knorris was an ancient devil, there were plenty of other undead creatures in addition to those that appeared frequently. However, the undead creature in the sky did share the same appearance and aura as Osric. Although it couldn't be Osric, it was definitely related to Osric. Undead creature created by Osric using the eternal furnace? Upon hearing Knorris' comment, Lin Li could not help but be shocked. Creating life had always been regarded as a godly action. Although Osric created only an undead creature, they could also be regarded as another form of life in a sense. In the beginning, Osric made this thing with the soul of 100,000 rebels and a clone of himself made in the eternal furnace. Later, he named it Ghost, Knorris explained as he thought about Osric whom he admired, even though the latter sealed him in a hammer. Knorris was an ancient deity, and to him, human beings were just one of the many life forms that had appeared in Amril. Just like Osric that used the souls of 100,000 rebels as materials, those spirits were not very precious to him either. However, Lin Li still could not help but gasp after hearing the origin of the ghost even though he'd himself come to Amril from another world. He thought, damn it, Osric lives up to his nickname the Butcher. He used the souls of 100,000 rebels as alchemy materials. No wonder that era was called the Dark Age. No wonder the High Elves were annihilated after they got overthrown, and even failed to keep the Tree of Eternity. Lin Li did not know if there was reincarnation for souls in this world. Perhaps, after the 100,000 rebels were killed, the souls would disperse after a long time. However, the pain that the souls had borne when being smelted together in the eternal furnace was truly unimaginable. However, Lin Li was very clear that those things had already happened, and there was no point for him to worry about it. Anyway, the High Elves had already been destroyed. At least, he now knew that the undead creature in the sky was not Osric, but an entity called Ghost. However, given the infinite power of that ghost that was nearing the sanctuary realm, this information was not very useful to Lin Li. When the difference in strength reached a certain level, it would not be easy to make use of weaknesses. Hence, Lin Li stopped thinking about what weaknesses of the ghost he could use, and decided to continue with his plan to focus on dealing with the psychic array, which he found to be realistic. After the observation just now, Lin Li had basically already understood some things about the psychic array, which had a symbiotic or parasitic relationship with the conquering ManhwaRecap. Although the magic circuits that provided power were shared, another system of magic circuits had been extending to introduce power into the psychic array. It was indeed a wonderful idea. In this space where magical elements were scarce, the psychic array could actually share the same mana source as the conquering ManhwaRecap, without having to set up another source. As long as there is no problem in the conquering ManhwaRecap, there will not be any issues with the psychic array, and it can then continue using the power from the conquering ManhwaRecap. However, even though many people could think of this, they might not be able to realize this method if they did not have high attainments in inscriptions and magic. Be it the conquering ManhwaRecap or the psychic array, they were both top-grade entities in their respective fields. Even Lin Li was not confident of making changes to both. There seemed to be a channel that led the water to another direction beside the river. However, when implementing it, the issues to be considered were not so simple. The mana was not a stream of water that could be channeled in another direction. The magic circuit of the conquering ManhwaRecap was not like the river banks either, hence, a hole could not be opened beside it. Once the mana leaked, the entire ManhwaRecap would be destroyed. And worse still, even the Sky Castle would suffer severe consequences. There were also other reasons why Lin did not directly destroy the conquering ManhwaRecap, and instead resorted to other methods. One was to use the streets of the conquering ManhwaRecap as a magic circuit. The materials used for the streets might not be destroyed even by legendary magic. Secondly, it was also because the consequences would be dire if he were to destroy the conquering ManhwaRecap and cause a leak in the mana source. Third, after Lin Li got the magical crystal that controlled the Sky Castle, he began to regard it as his own even though he still had no strength to control it. As for the psychic array, it was already connected to the conquering ManhwaRecap, and there would be no difference between destroying the psychic array and the conquering ManhwaRecap. Moreover, it was also a good thing to Lin Li. Although he was a mage, he had a good affinity with undead creatures for some reason. Even his 2 servants were undead creatures. If he had the chance to control the Sky Castle in the future, he could perhaps let Norfeller's and Ujfalusi's power advance by leaps and bounds. Of course, those issues were too distant. Time waited for no man. If Lin Li had no way to overcome this difficulty, he wouldn't even be able to control the Sky Castle or conquering ManhwaRecap. Lin Li suspended himself in midair and carefully looked at the ground. He could not help but sigh. No matter who left this behind, it indeed is superb, he thought. The magic circuit of the psychic array was seamlessly integrated with the magic circuit of the conquering ManhwaRecap, yet there were no traces of it at all. It was as if the psychic array and the conquering ManhwaRecap were originally one whole. However, at the same time, there seemed to be no way to find the spots where they connected. With the support of the powerful source of mana, the power of the psychic array could be maximized. Of course, that was the only way the powerful towers could be used as magic nodes. Otherwise, no matter how powerful the creator thereof might be, it would be impossible to use the towers to arrange the psychic array, because it would completely violate the rules of the world. Norfeller and Ujfalusi had already dealt with their opponents and come to Lin Li's side, feeling like they ought to act as his guardians. When Lin Li looked at the sky, the appearance of the ghost became clearer. Most of his body seemed to be protruding from the dark mist, filled with infinite resentment and staring at Lin Li. In the distance, Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the others were not too optimistic. Without the support of Lin Li, they could only retreat when faced with the growing undead army. The endless undead army was almost filling up half of the Sky Castle. Even the roofs along the streets were filled with undead creatures. Now that time was running out, Lin Li scanned the surroundings and realized that he was on the verge of despair. He guessed that he probably only had 10 seconds, he could no longer afford to hesitate or delay. If he could not turn the situation around within 10 seconds, he would not be able to escape from the undead creature even if they were extremely powerful. Lin Li flew onto the ground and faced the tower, after which a crystal pen appeared in his hand. Without hesitation, Lin Li waved it in his hand and a hazy radiance glowed, leaving a clear race of light on the tower. In the blink of an eye, the inscription of the 3 powerful ManhwaRecaps was completed. In fact, after discovering the relationship between the psychic array and the conquering ManhwaRecap, Lin Li had already begun to think about how to cut off the magic circuit of the psychic array. However, when he was trying to find a place to start, the two had almost merged into a whole entity, causing Lin Li to delay. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been pressed for time. The 3 ManhwaRecaps Lin Li just painted on the base of the tower were named Furguro, Max, and Buwanga. Although the 3 ManhwaRecaps were completed instantly, they were all guru level. Any ManhwaRecap was enough for most inscription masters to study for a lifetime. It would be impossible to create a perfect one without decades of accumulation of experience. Lin Li was not making a mountain out of a molehill, but the mana source was really domineering. When the conquering ManhwaRecap was created, every resident in the Sky Castle could integrate himself into the castle anytime and use its power. It would be no exaggeration to say that the terrifying ManhwaRecap would make everyone become godly. In this world, power was not born out of thin air, and the mana source that could support such a daunting conquering ManhwaRecap was beyond explicable by words. The psychic array and the conquering ManhwaRecap shared the same mana source, and even a small portion contained shocking and massive amounts of mana. Hence, if he wanted to break this massive mana, it would still be hard to do so using a guru-level ManhwaRecap. It was a pity that Lin Li's attainment in inscription was only on the guru level, and he could only use the 3 ManhwaRecaps to add on to his current ones. The effect of Furguro's ManhwaRecap was devouring mana, which was a control over the amount of that mana. Lin Li hoped to reduce some of the mana from the magic circuit. Otherwise, the massive mana would just wash everything away like a flood. The effect of the max ManhwaRecap was control over the intensity and strength of the mana. Although the mana in the magic circuit had been reduced due to Furguro ManhwaRecap, the impact of that mana was also rather powerful, which was the reason the conquering ManhwaRecap and psychic array had such strong magic nodes. Only those 36 towers could withstand the impact of the mana. After being devoured by Furguro Mageweth and then weakened by Max Mageweth, the mana in the magic circuit of the psychic array would become less intense. Meanwhile, the effect of the third Mageweth, Buwanga, was to release the mana. However, the greatest characteristic of the psychic array was to convert the mana in space into the power of death. Hence, simply releasing the mana would not cause too much of an impact on the psychic array. There would at most just be a slight reduction in the effect of the psychic array. Hence, he added a fourth Mageweth and put an end to it with the Blaze Trap Mageweth. The mana exhibited by the Buwanga Mageweth would be infused into the Blaze Trap Mageweth. At the same time, a massive power would also be exhibited in order for them to deal with the undead army. Lin Li used the four Mageweths to temporarily change the structure of the conquering Mageweth and obstruct the flow of mana through the psychic array, causing it to lose the support of the mana by channeling the mana that should have been infused into the tower into the Blaze Trap Mageweth instead. Unfortunately, due to the current constraints, Lin Li did not have much time to stabilize the structure of the entire Mageweth. Even though the mana was already devoured by Furguro Mageweth and weakened by Max Mageweth, the Blaze Trap Mageweth could not be maintained for too long under the infusion of mana. Although the four Mageweths could be balanced for a short while, the Blaze Trap Mageweth was still too fragile, and could only last up to 10 minutes before getting broken by the massive mana that had caused the entire structure of the Mageweth to lose its balance. Once the Blaze Trap Mageweth was destroyed, the balance would be broken, and everything would return to its original track. It couldn't be helped. After all, they were in the Sky Castle, where the source of mana for the conquering Mageweth was simply too massive, and it could not be digested by a few Mageweths that were formed hastily. Besides, even if Lin Li had enough time to consolidate the entire Mageweth structure, it would at most extend the 10-minute period by a little instead of resulting in a substantial change. Lin Li also knew very well that buying time did not have much practical significance in the situation that he and the others were in. If he could not open the path to the teleportation portal within 10 minutes, then it wouldn't matter how much time he could buy, because once the ghost in the sky awakened, its terrifying power that was near the sanctuary realm would overwhelm everyone. Even if he were to take out his debris of the stars, he would not be able to pose much of a threat to the ghost that was near the sanctuary realm, because he did not truly have stars of fury. Right after putting his pen away and completing the four Mageweths, Lin Li continued to fly towards another tower. Although Norfeller and Edgefalusi had no idea what their master was doing, they knew what their mission was without needing any instructions from him. The two undead creatures flew towards their master in a bid to block the undead creatures that were getting in their way. However, just as they were about to approach their master, they noticed that he had drawn a few dazzling Mageweths, and was flying towards another tower. There were 36 towers and 144 master-level Mageweths, but Lin Li only had 10 seconds. For many people, 10 seconds was probably the time needed for just a few blinks and a few breaths. However, for Lin Li, he had to go around the 36 towers of the Sky Castle and leave behind 4 Mageweths below each one within 10 seconds. Besides, Lin Li also had to ensure that the Mageweths he had drawn would not go wrong. Otherwise, all of his efforts would be in vain. The dark mist in the sky seemed to have become thinner, but the death aura from the ghost was getting more intense, and the tall figure became clearer. A faint roar of thunder could even be heard vaguely. They felt extremely oppressed by the massive power that was near the sanctuary realm, causing them fear. On the ground, the tide of death was continuously summoning undead creatures, and the undead army was growing at a rapid rate. They were densely packed and devouring every inch of space in the Sky Castle. The endless undead army surged towards them wave after wave, so much that Cheyenne and Elder Randy had no time to breathe at all. The attacks of the undead creatures were getting much more frenzied too. Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the rest had agony written all over their faces. They'd initially thought that the quest had ended successfully, with each of them making great gains. They'd thought that their power would definitely surge after they returned. In fact, when they'd got the items, they'd begun to fantasize about the benefits those things could bring to their forces, and how they could develop rapidly. However, now that they were facing the overbearing undead army, their hearts sunk to rock bottom. All of their fantasies seemed extremely ridiculous. Regardless of what they had obtained, it would all just be in vain. What did that young mage who left in advance do? Did he really retreat back to the central tower? Or could he be creating some miracles at this moment? For Lin Li, Elder Randy, and Cheyenne, 10 seconds was like a countdown to the end of their lives. Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the rest could no longer be bothered to think about what they could do. All they knew was that they were desperately resisting the attacks from the undead creatures. Judging from the situation in front of them, they could tell that they would probably get killed by the overwhelming undead creatures before the ghost in the sky even awakened. The undead creatures were continuously coming forth in a bid to stop Lin Li. However, Lin Li's flying skills were already at the maximum. It was almost reaching the point of teleporting, and even Norfeller could not catch up with Lin Li. Since the undead creatures had yet to fill up the sky castle, they could not do anything to Lin Li. Lin Li frowned and pursed his lips while continuously urging himself to hurry up. He had never found time to be so precious before, and finally understood why others considered time to be life. If he couldn't finish the mageways within 10 seconds even once, he would lose everything even if he only had one tower left. Lin Li was channeling his maximum mental strength, while mana rolled continuously within him, almost emerging from his body. He could no longer see anything apart from the towers, not even the ghost in the sky nor Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the rest. Even Lin Li himself had no idea if he could complete all of the mageways within such a short period of time. All he could do was think of every possible means to speed up using his mental strength and mana. It seemed that Lin Li's shadow would only show when he was drawing a mageway. He waved the inscription crystal pen in his hand and drew a mageway, while mana continuously poured out. Before the glow disappeared, he had already arrived in front of another tower and was repeating his actions. The undead creatures, which received instructions and were preparing to stop Lin Li, had no choice but to change their direction and move away after receiving another order. The undead creatures actually turned around helplessly while receiving continuous orders because they had no idea where to go to catch Lin Li. Within just 10 seconds, 144 guru-level mageways were drawn on 36 towers. It was an impressive feat that probably no one would believe. 10 seconds was not enough for one to even walk through the 36 towers, let alone draw guru-level mageways. The requirements for the mana and mental strength of the 144 guru-level mageways were absolutely terrifying. If it weren't for the fact that Lin Li's power had already reached the peak of level 22 and he had gotten a breakthrough in his understanding of nomological power, he probably wouldn't be able to achieve such great speed even if he could also draw several mageways. He wouldn't be able to draw so many either. Fortunately, Lin Li's mental strength was continuously growing at a high speed under the stimulation of the Evil Eye Tyrant's magical crystal ring. Also fortunately, Lin Li's mental strength was purified again by the massive controlling magical crystal. That was the very reason Lin Li chose to take this dangerous path. It was not because he was underestimating his own strength, but because he knew where his abilities were. If Lin Li's current strength was the same as when he'd first arrived in the Sky Castle, the first thing he would do would be to return to the 6th floor of the central tower to seek refuge from the space traps created by the Immortal King. He didn't care if he would be trapped in there or not, because survival was the most important thing at the moment. However, Lin Li was very clear about his strength, and knew what he could and could not do. Going around 36 towers and drawing 144 mageways within 10 seconds did seem absolutely impossible for others, but Lin Li was confident about giving it a try. Hell! An angry roar sounded in the sky, and thick black mist burst out from the ghost. It seemed to be able to kill all of insignificant people below it. The undead army broke into an uproar, and the devouring speed of the Door of Darkness was significantly faster, while a large number of undead creatures swarmed out. Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the others had already retreated as far as they could, and they were already leaning against the base of the central tower behind them, looking desperately at the undead creatures that were swarming around. Cheyenne was as pale as a sheet, and his weak hands trembled while he held on to his dark moon staff. Everyone else around him was extremely disheveled, and even the sacred unicorn was covered in wounds. The last tower. Lin Li suddenly appeared, but there were countless undead creatures around the tower. Lin Li didn't even bother to cast a defensive spell. As soon as he appeared, he quickly raised his hand and drew a ManhwaRecap on tower using the crystal pen before the undead creatures even responded. The gilded skeletal warriors raised their sharp blades in the air and shot them at Lin Li, who was standing in the middle from all directions. However, when the swords almost touched Lin Li, he finally finished the last ManhwaRecap, and his surroundings seemed to have frozen. Within 10 seconds, he completed 144 Guru-level ManhwaRecaps on the 36 towers. Lin Li was almost exhausted and out of breath. His mental strength was giving him a splitting headache that made him feel weak and feeble. After completing all the ManhwaRecaps, Lin Li finally realized that he could not tolerate it any longer. Facing the undead creatures and the necromagic that was looming over him, he could not even withdraw some mana to release a low-level defensive spell. Everything depended on whether his plan would succeed or not. Otherwise, he would face a horrible death. Lin Li did not immediately take out the huge magical crystal to help himself recover, and instead used the recovery power of the star-scarred robe to support himself. The ghost in the sky that had been sleeping for over a millennium suddenly roared and released thick fumes of black smoke. Almost all of his figure was exposed, and the massive death aura was shrouding the entire sky castle. It finally awakened, didn't it? Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the rest were overwhelmed with disappointment, which was written all over their faces. The undead creature in the sky was invincible, and its awakening meant that everyone wouldn't have a chance of surviving. However, at this moment, the 36 towers suddenly released plenty of dazzling light again at a rapid speed. When the 36 towers were lit up, the entire sky castle was shrouded by the blazing light that was like the scorching sun. It then engulfed everything, while the thick death aura immediately vanished. Seeing that the blaze trap ManhwaRecap was being activated normally, Lin Li closed his eyes to avoid the glaring light. He no longer had to worry about everything else in the surroundings. The countless necromagic spells that were flying above him vanished instantly before they even landed. The swords that almost touched Lin Li's body melted instantly like snow in the light. The undead army that was surrounding Lin Li was suddenly shrouded in black mist. Even the gilded skeletal warriors, with legendary strength, turned into ash in the blink of an eye. The ghost in the sky seemed to be breaking free from the thick fumes of black mist, but at this moment, it was drawn back by the rolling black mist again, leaving behind only an indignant roar that filled the entire sky castle. In the magic circuit of the conquering ManhwaRecap, the magnificent mana had been taken over by Furguro ManhwaRecap and weakened by Max ManhwaRecap, after which it got injected into the blaze trap ManhwaRecap by Buwanga ManhwaRecap. Despite the filtering by the three ManhwaRecaps, the mana was still extremely powerful, and the power of the blaze trap ManhwaRecap was maximized. The outburst of the 36 ManhwaRecaps completely ignited the sky castle that was silent for a long time. The entire sky castle seemed to be a bright and shining sun that was engulfed by light. The infinite undead army melted instantly without resistance, like ice in the sun. When the light was no longer that glaring, Lin Li knew that it was time to leave. The mana source of the conquering ManhwaRecap was just too domineering and tyrannical. Even if he had arranged the 4 Guru-level ManhwaRecaps, he still could not terminate the massive mana. Once the blaze trap ManhwaRecap collapsed under the mana infusion, everything would return to its original state. What are you waiting for? Flee! Lin Li shouted loudly at Cheyenne and the rest while taking his 2 undead servants with him as he flew towards the teleportation portal. Although the light that erupted from the blaze trap ManhwaRecap caused great damage to the undead creatures, Norfeller and Ujfalusi were rather strong. Hence, they bore the pain and followed their master into the light. Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the rest were all stunned by this sudden change. The undead army had been almost drowning the entire sky castle. They reckoned that there were more than 1 million undead creatures in the undead army. No one knew what the young mage had done to annihilate almost all of the undead creatures. Even the legendary undead creatures turned weak under the light, and it was only a matter of time before they got destroyed by the light. When they heard Lin Li yell, they recovered from the shock and stared at the street that was almost free of undead creatures. They quickly got a grip on themselves and scurried towards the teleportation portal. Although they did not know what Lin Li had done, the terrifying undead creature was still present, and if they did not take the chance to escape, they would definitely regret it. Everyone rushed straight to the teleportation portal, and no one bothered to touch the weak, legendary undead creatures even when they passed by them. Everything that they faced just now was really too terrifying. What they wanted now was to leave quickly. The ghost in the sky stopped roaring indignantly, and instead began chanting something that no one could understand. There seemed to be some magic brewing in the sky. "Hurry, hurry, and flee, it's the undead heaven." Kanora's shriek of horror sounded in Lin Li's mind. Lin Li's heart suddenly sank, and he turned around to look at the others. "Hurry up, that is the undead heaven." After leaving this place, Cheyenne's Manhwa family, Elder Randy, and the elves would all become the most important partners of the Tower of Dusk. Lin Li didn't want the deals that he had clinched with them to become void just because they couldn't escape. Everyone panicked upon hearing Lin Li's yelling. They could not hide their horror at all. They tried to bear with the fatigue after the battle and did their best to raise their power to the maximum. Although they could not understand what magic spell the undead creature chanted in the sky, no one doubted Lin Li. The undead heaven was a necromagic spell that was said to reach level 27. The ultimate form of necromagic was even more tyrannical than the seven-realm spiral. In this space, everything would be turned into death aura, and all living creatures would be turned into undead creatures. They would also be forever trapped in the soul fire that was released by the caster. Even a legendary figure would be no exception. Despite having just experienced a fierce battle, no one dared to let their guard down under the threat of the horrendous magic, undead heaven. They continuously squeezed their potential in a bid to rush into the teleportation portal before the undead heaven was completed. However, due to the oppression by the undead army, everyone who'd initially been already near the teleportation portal was now rather far away from it. The constant chants in the sky were like the footsteps of the Reaper. When they were outside of this world, they were all prominent figures because of their legendary power, but they were now no longer bothered about that, because escaping was their top priority. Even Elder Randy, who had experienced plenty of ups and downs, could not help but panic. When faced with undead heaven, a level 23 legendary powerhouse was insignificant. Seeing that they were getting nearer and nearer to the teleportation portal, the chanting, too, seemed to have quickened as if it was the end of the spell. While running for their lives, they looked up to see that there was a black glow in the sky, and it seemed that the overpowering undead heaven would be exploding anytime soon. Although Lin Li had overdrafted a lot of his mental strength and mana to complete the 144 mage withs, he had plenty of powerful tools, which was rather fortunate. The Ring of the Evil Eye Tyrant magical crystal had excellent healing effects, while the star-scarred robe that he got from Elder Randy aided him by continuously replenishing mana. Hence, it did not affect his speed in running away. As soon as the blaze trap erupted, Lin Li knew that his plan succeeded. Hence, he immediately fled to the teleportation portal. Although he was initially much farther away from the teleportation portal than Cheyenne and the rest, he had already passed them, and could now see the outline of the teleportation portal. Lin Li's undead servants, Norfeller and Ujfalusi, followed closely behind him. Despite facing the attacks of the blaze trap, which dealt them plenty of damage since they were also undead creatures, the truth was still apparent. Ujfalusi was not purely an undead creature, while Norfeller was a level 21 vampire which had ingested the blood of dragons. Hence, the damage done to them was not strong enough to make them too weak to escape. Cheyenne and the three legendary leaders of the Dark Blade had been fighting each other for years, and he definitely wouldn't have been able to survive for so long if he hadn't been significantly competent. No one knew what method he was using, but he was clearly flying faster than he should be, so much so that he was already closely behind Lin Li and the undead creatures. Elder Randy and the other elves were the last. The intense battle just now caused them to be injured in various ways. Although Elder Randy used his healing nature magic, there was no time for him to stop and rest when faced with the threat of the undead heaven. There was only one thing everyone wanted, and that was to leave this place as soon as possible. If they were to delay by even just 1 second, they could become an undead creature or a puppet of the undead heaven. If Elder Randy turned into a thunder eagle, he would be able to make himself fly faster. However, he could not leave Princess Elune behind. During the battle just now, the sacred unicorn was heavily wounded because it tried to protect Princess Elune, who was riding on its back. Hence, it was far slower than its peak speed, and it could at most catch up with them now. The light emitted by the blaze trap ManhwaRecap gradually became weaker, but it was not because the structure of the ManhwaRecap was destroyed. After all, it had only been less than a minute. The weakening was caused by the magic in the sky that was almost complete. The massive death energy was already beginning to suppress the light. Finally, just as everyone was about to rush into the teleportation portal, the sounds of the ghost chanting spells in the sky stopped, and a powerful burst of death energy erupted. The light in the sky castle was instantly consumed by darkness, and everything turned pitch dark once again. They could only vaguely see the blaze trap ManhwaRecap emitting a faint halo beneath every tower. Sensing the terrifying death energy swarming from behind, Elder Randy and the other elves, who fell behind, were clearly in despair. They were so close to reaching the teleportation portal that was probably less than a second away. Unfortunately, it became a clear divide between life and death. However, at this moment, a massive and tyrannical force seemed to have erupted from Elder Randy's body, pushing them forward violently like an invisible giant hand. All of a sudden, the four elves and the sacred unicorn seemed to have lost control of their bodies. However, by the time they realized what was going on, they discovered that they had already staggered and stumbled into the teleportation portal. It's the gravitational skill. Elder Randy looked out of the teleportation portal to see that Norfeller and Ujfalusi were dashing in, followed by Cheyenne, who was obviously stunned. Meanwhile, Lin Li, who was taking the lead just now, somehow became the last and was outside the teleportation portal. Realizing that their master had yet to enter, Ujfalusi and Norfeller tried to dash out, but at this moment, the teleportation portal had already been activated, and the light was hampering their vision. The two undead creatures had already been sent away from the sky castle together with the rest. Indeed, Lin Li did push Elder Randy and the other elves forward with his gravitational skill when they were about to be engulfed by the black glow of the undead heaven. However, Lin Li wasn't trying to sacrifice himself to save others. The reason he chose to save them was actually very simple. If Elder Randy died, all of the deals that he'd clinched with him regarding the herbs would be moot. Of course, Lin Li was not the kind to give up his life for money. If he were to lose his life, no amount of money would matter. If Lin Li were to die, his allies probably would not have the chance to continue to cooperate with the Tower of Dusk. Seeing that the infinite black glow was still sweeping through, Lin Li patted the dust away from his body unhurriedly and flew towards the teleportation portal. At the same time, the debris of the stars, holy light, began flying on its own and suddenly burst into a dazzling light. The two rays of light, one black and one light, collided forcefully, and the sanctuary realm power that erupted from holy light left the undead heaven with no choice but to pause momentarily. If Lin Li were in control, he might not be able to block the undead heaven. After all, it was a level 27 sanctuary realm magic. However, holy light had always been very sensitive to dark force. Although it was tempered by Lin Li and did not conflict with gloomy dark, that did not mean that it would ignore the provocation of other dark forces. Lin Li took advantage of the abrupt pause of the undead heaven to enter the teleportation portal. As it began to activate, his figure was engulfed by the light of the teleportation portal. By the time the black glow of the undead heaven shrouded the teleportation portal, Lin Li was already missing. Watching the various scenes that were overlapping and changing around him, Lin Li heaved a sigh of relief. He was already in the chaos of time and space in the teleportation portal, and there was finally a happy ending to their quest. Lin Li had not expected that he would experience so much when he accepted Cheyenne's invitation and decided to participate in this expedition. Of course, the more effort he put in, the more he would get. Lin Li was rather pleased with the results of this quest. On the bright side, all the three parties understood that the value of Lin Li's gains might be considered relatively small. The magic tide array and the blueprint of the Tower of Death that Cheyenne obtained were undoubtedly far more valuable than the items that Lin Li obtained. Had they not known that the huge magical crystal could be used to control the sky castle, they wouldn't have thought that the magical crystal was more valuable than what they had. However, in Lin Li's opinion, something would be considered valuable only if he could use it. Otherwise, it would just be beautiful, but useless. Besides, most of Lin Li's gains during the quest were unknown to others. Had they known about them, they would definitely have been extremely jealous. Of course, Lin Li was also elated to see such a situation. Since they felt like they had made plenty of gains, he reckoned that he should let them continue feeling a sense of superiority. He believed that their mindset would also bring certain benefits to the Tower of Dusk in the future cooperation. Although connections played a very small role in the exchange of interests between forces, there would definitely be some uses for them. Hence, from this perspective, Lin Li felt that doing them a favor this time might also be considered another type of gain. After everything ended, Lin Li finally calmed down and got a grip on his emotions. He began to think about his gains and how he could use them to increase his and the Tower of Dusk's power. Lin Li stroked Dream Garden on his finger, in which lived the elemental Wyrm Xiaohua, which was his very first gain in the Haiga mountain range. Although he did not have concrete evidence, Lin Li was utterly certain that the elemental Wyrm Xiaohua should be one of the dragon aspects and a descendant of the Dragon of Dream. When Lin Li first obtained the elemental Wyrm, he was still feeling troubled and vexed because of its huge appetite. He fed it continuously with magical crystals, but it seemed like a bottomless pit that did not give him any response. Between fully supporting Xiaohua's growth and nurturing it into becoming his guardian and using his magical crystals for more productive purposes while keeping Xiaohua as a pet, Lin Li had chosen the latter. After all, he needed plenty of magical crystals in order for Xiaohua to grow up. God knew how long it would take to reach the stage where it was strong enough to brave all odds to protect him. However, Lin Li was a little bit tempted now. After all, the baby elemental Wyrm Xiaohua was a descendant of the Dragon of Dream, and would definitely become a powerful entity if it were to grow to its fullest potential. Lin Li owned the dead seeds of the Tree of Eternity and a massive magical crystal with infinite mana. Although there were other important uses for them, he reckoned that there should be no problem in providing some mana for Xiaohua, which was growing. However, Lin Li found the Seed of Eternity to be a pity. If he could really make it grow into a Tree of Eternity, it would definitely bring about a significant increase in the Tower of Dusk's power. Unfortunately, the seed had already died, and he did not find any solution which he could use to revive it in the Sky Castle. A dead seed could only be used as a source of mana that was non-renewable. However, Osric was a disciple of the Immortal King, and had even moved away almost everything from the laboratory of the Immortal King. Lin Li had no idea if there wouldn't be any information about the Seed of Eternity in Osric's mausoleum. At the thought of this, Lin Li shook his head and found his idea to be rather unrealistic. If Osric really had had any means, he would have probably already taken the Seed of Eternity with him. Back in the valley where Lin Li found the elemental Wyrm Xiaohua, he also obtained the skeleton of a titan. Although it couldn't compare to the skeleton of the Dragon of Destruction in his Ring of Endless Storm, it was enough to create the Black Front Fortress. With the Black Front Fortress, Lin Li would be able to increase the power of the Death Knights that he subdued and collected in the Seven Realm Spiral. Lin Li did not forget the terror that the Death Knights brought about when he met the Retribution Knight who commanded the other Death Knights in the Seven Realm Spiral. Lin Li had made plenty of gains in the Sky Castle, but the most valuable one was the knowledge he obtained in the Seven Realm Spiral. Lin Li was well aware that the others were external objects, after all. Regardless of how much power they could supply, he would be left with nothing once the power was stripped away from him. The power he mastered through his own understanding would be the most reliable. The Seven Realm Spiral was the ultimate form of magical domains that contained the knowledge that powerhouses of the Sanctuary Realm had about the usage, change, and creation of nomological power. Lin Li managed to use his Light and Darkness domain to create his Light and Darkness sword through his understanding of the Seven Realm Spiral. With his sword, he cut and destroyed Stephen's soul-devouring domain, and the understanding was also the reason Lin Li could manipulate the power of the three pieces of the debris of the stars that was near the Sanctuary Realm, defeat Thunderbolt, and destroy the mana-condensed stars of fury. The enlightenment and knowledge that Lin Li got from the Seven Realm Spiral was to be of great help to him in his promotion to the Sanctuary Realm. In fact, when he stepped into the Seven Realm Spiral, the gains that he obtained in the Seven Realm Spiral would still aid him in increasing his power and abilities. In addition to the gains from the Seven Realm Spiral, another important item he obtained was the Book of Magic that he found in the library of the Central Tower, which were just like textbooks. The books might not be important to Lin Li himself, but they were essential and significant for the Tower of Dusk. After all, the Tower of Dusk had only been established not too long ago. Despite Lin Li's efforts that gave them a good start, a force with money but no competent manpower would only be a commercial organization, and not a guild of magic. The books of magic that seemed basic were like precious books that would help the mages grow. Although the content wasn't that profound, it was enough to ensure that the learners would successfully reach the legendary realm. Lin Li was sure that it would definitely give the Tower of Dusk an advantage over other forces when it came to training and nurturing mages. The development of a force would only be healthy if there was a continuous cultivation of excellent talents because manpower was fundamental, and everything else was just the icing on the cake. Although Lin Li had 20 alchemy puppets that could immediately become a powerful force after their cores were modified, the demise of the Tower of Dusk would only be a matter of time if they had to rely on this force to survive. Lin Li was still thinking about himself and the future development of the Tower of Dusk, and pondering how he could take advantage of the benefits gained from the Sky Castle. On the other hand, Cheyenne, Elder Randy, and the rest who entered the teleportation portal before him had already appeared at the teleportation portal deep inside the cave. Looking at the familiar scene around the teleportation portal, Cheyenne couldn't help but feel emotional and thankful for the fact that he had invited the young mage Lin Li along. Otherwise, the various obstacles that they'd encountered along the way might have posed a bigger threat to him, and he might not have been able to even pass through the dragon's cave, let alone the murderous traps in the Sky Castle. Indeed, sometimes a choice might change the destiny of an entire family. He initially only had a minor conflict with Lin Li during the cooperation in the Scar of Death. Later on, he received an invitation to attack the Sire Bandits. For most forces, it would be good enough if they did not add fuel to the fire. However, the Manhwa family made some counterintuitive choices by sending Hutton and the elite mages of the family to participate in the siege of the Sire Bandits. The reality had proven their initial choices correct. He was originally the weakest party out of all who participated in the expedition, yet he was the one who made the greatest gains. The hundreds of high-level Elven Magic Legion magical equipment sets, a legendary demon-winged angel, various magic books that contained esoteric magic knowledge and lost forbidden curses, and the blueprint of the Tower of Death would all bring about drastic changes to the Manhwa family. Cheyenne thought about it while slowly walking down the teleportation portal. However, he did not leave immediately, and instead turned around to wait for the young mage Lin Li to appear. Elder Randy and the elves followed Cheyenne out, but they all seemed rather confused and dumbfounded. They did not seem happy to be out of danger at all, because they all knew that they would have been left behind in the Sky Castle if not for the gravitational skill. Are humans, particularly that young mage, really despicable, shameless, selfish, and cunning? Even Elder Randy had doubts about his long-established mindset, because what happened just now was proof that he and the rest would not be able to leave the Sky Castle if it weren't for Lin Li who rescued them. Yet, the young mage Lin Li ended up being trapped in the Sky Castle, because he chose to save them. The undead heaven was level 27, and they reckoned that it would be difficult for Lin Li to escape even if he had power that was at the peak of level 22. Walking down the teleportation portal, Elder Randy looked at Princess Alun, who was beside him before glancing at the other two subordinates. He could not help but sigh and think to himself, I didn't expect there to be kind-hearted and noble humans, too. Like Elder Randy, Princess Alun, Keulaphan, and Gilder were all filled with complicated emotions. They'd never thought that they would be rescued by a human being, which was even more shocking than getting rescued by other elves. They turned around in unison and stared at the teleportation portal, waiting for the portal to light up again. However, after Norfeller and Edgefalusi exited, the teleportation portal no longer lit up again for a long time. With the passage of time, their hearts began to sink. Everyone knew how tense and urgent the situation was at that time. Lin Li could only escape the attacks from the undead heaven by following them into the teleportation portal. If that had been the case, the young mage should have already come out after some time. However, they still did not see any signs of the teleportation portal being activated after a long time. Could it be that he had? As time passed, everyone gradually lost all hope because they had been waiting for a long time. Cheyenne walked towards Norfeller and Ujfalusi, and said, "I'm sorry, I'm afraid your master. There's no point in waiting any longer. Why don't you two go back with us?" Cheyenne was saying that out of goodwill. After all, those two undead creatures were Lin Li's servants. Although they were rather competent, it would still be difficult for them to leave the Haiga mountain range safely, hence, it would be better for them to follow the team. In Cheyenne's opinion, Lin Li could have very likely already gotten trapped in the undead heaven, and he reckoned that bringing Lin Li's undead servants away from the Haiga mountain range safely would be a form of gratitude. However, Norfeller and Ujfalusi shook their heads at the same time, and coldly said, "It's all right, Master will be fine." "I know what you guys are thinking, but the undead heaven," Cheyenne paused when he saw their firm expressions. Everyone knew that there was definitely something like a soul contract between Lin Li and the two undead creatures. Otherwise, they would never be willing to be a servant to a human being. In such contracts, the servants would die together with their master in order to allow them to forever prioritize their master's safety. Since Norfeller and Ujfalusi were not dead yet, it could indeed mean that Lin Li was not dead. However, Cheyenne and Elder Randy knew that the power of the undead heaven did not lie in killing enemies, but in turning them into undead creatures. It would use soul fire to turn enemies into undead puppets that would belong to the undead heaven forever. Hence, they knew that Lin Li was still alive, but that did not prove that Lin Li was unscathed. How could Norfeller and Ujfalusi not have thought of that? Cheyenne believed that they were also well aware that it was actually a good chance for them to regain freedom. However, the two of them were clearly loyal to the young mage Lin Li, and were no longer restrained by the soul contract. With a soft sigh, Cheyenne said, "Well, I'll take my leave then. I'll do my best to help take care of Mage Felix's Tower of Dusk." Although the Elder Randy and the elves had always seen the undead creatures as filthy beings, they had a change in mindset and opinion of the undead creatures when they saw Norfeller's and Ujfalusi's reaction. However, they did not speak to the undead creatures, and simply looked up at the teleportation portal before leaving quietly with Cheyenne. "No, why haven't I arrived yet?" Lin Li suddenly frowned and snapped out of his thoughts. Although he had no idea how long it had been, it was definitely more than a minute. He wondered, why am I still in the chaos of time and space? Could it be that holy light and undead heaven have collided and caused an unknown effect on the teleportation portal? Lin Li immediately panicked. It was not a laughing matter, for he was now in the chaos of time and space. If the teleportation portal were to fail or malfunction abruptly, he would definitely be ripped into shreds by the storm. Lin Li hurriedly scanned his surroundings until he finally confirmed that the power around him was still within the normal range. He was finally relieved. However, he suddenly thought about the long journey that he had when he was transported to Amril. He wondered if he would be transported to another place again after this long journey. If he were to return to his hometown, would his magic power still work? If he were to be transported to another mainland, what would things look like? Sensing the unusual changes in the teleportation, Lin Li allowed his imagination to run for a long time, but he eventually calmed down again. In any case, his magic powers could never be stripped away from him. Regardless of whether he returned to Amril or another place, his abilities would be what allowed him to continue surviving. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.